Happy Monday, Year 5. Welcome back to this week's maths. So we're on week 5 of our spring term maths lessons, and we're going to continue with our decimals work. One thing that's going to be a bit different this week, on the school website, alongside this PowerPoint and your assessment for this week, there's also a Fluent in 5 record sheet. What we'd like you to do is fill that sheet in following the instructions each day. And then on Friday, we'd like you to upload that to your work folder for your teacher to see, please. So please be honest about whether you got things right or wrong, so that we know where we need to do a little bit of extra input or where we can move on. And this week, you've also got one assessment to do, and this week it's on Friday. So you don't need to upload any work until Friday, unless you have a particular question or a problem that you would like a teacher to get back to you on. On Friday, there'll be 2 things to upload: your week Fluent in 5 and your assessment. Okay, let's get started then. So first of all, here's your Fluent in 5 for today. Please pause, give yourselves 5 minutes and then unpause for your answers. Here are your answers today. So hopefully this one, we haven't seen one like that for a while. It's just 6 lots of a quarter. So if you imagine that you had lots and lots of pizzas and you cut them all into 4 equal parts into quarters, and then you took 6 of those quarters, you'd end up with 1 whole pizza and then 2 quarters, or 1.5, or you could write it like an improper fraction too. Just like last week we said that actually a tenth is when you take a whole one and you split it into 10 equal parts. Now for today's session, I'm going to use a 100 flat, base 10, to represent a whole one, okay? So this is your whole one. So if we divided it into 10 equal parts, and I'll just show you by putting 10 rods on top, each one of these rods is going to be 1/10, okay? 10 of them make a whole one. 1 part out of 10 equal parts. And it looks like this, or it could look like this on a number line. If we divide those ones up again, if we divide each of these into 10, we'd end up with 100. I'm not going to put 100 little squares on here, but I'm just showing you that 100 of those would make a whole one, meaning each one is worth 100th. And if we zoom in on the number line, if we look at this section from 0 to 0.1, we could also split that down 10 more times, which would give us 100 intervals between 0 and 1, meaning each of those intervals is worth 1/100th, 1 part out of 100 equal parts. Okay, so let's have a look. Each part, so each one of these little squares is worth 1/100th. Each rod is a tenth, and each flat we're going to say represents a whole, okay? So we talked about tenths, we're now focusing on 100th. So 1/100th then, as a fraction, would be written like this: 1 part out of 100 equal parts. In words, it would look like this. Very careful to say 100th and not 100. If we're writing it as a decimal, we need to add another column to those ones we looked at last week. So last week we said that we had ones, then the decimal point, then tenths. Now we're adding a 100th column as well. So 1/100th would be written as 0 ones, 0 tenths, and 1/100th. And if I get 2 of those, it would be 0 ones, 0 tenths, and 2/100ths, and so on. During these next few lessons, if you want to, you can either use base 10 to support, using one of these to represent a whole one, or you can follow this website link and you can go to a virtual base 10, which gives you flats, rods, and squares for you to play around with if you find that useful. Okay, right, let's have a look then. So, what is the decimal for each of the following? 4/100ths. Well, thinking about what I said about the place value grid, I'm just going to put those in there like that for you. How would you write 4/100th? What do you think? Okay, so it's going to be 0 whole ones, 0 tenths, and 4/100ths. B, 6/100ths of a centimetre is going to be no whole ones, no tenths, and 6/100ths. How would we write 7/100ths? That's right, we'd 0 whole ones, 0 tenths, and 7/100ths. And then 8 hundredths is 0 whole ones, 0 tenths, and 8 hundredths. Okay, we read these as 0.04, 0.06. Be careful not to forget that 0 in the tenth column, because otherwise you're writing tenths and not hundredths. Okay, pictorially then, what might it look like? What decimals do the following shaded parts represent? Pause, have your guess, and then I'll tell you the answers. Okay, each of these is 100, and there are 9 squares shaded. So just with fractions, we'd have said it was 9 parts out of 100 equal parts. We know that's 9 hundredths, which is 0 whole ones, 0 tenths, and 9 hundredths. And then this one, there are 7 hundredths shaded, which is 0.07. Okay, let's have a look. This is what it looks like on a number line then. So again, I'm showing you the visual just to help you. So we start at 0, then we'd have, if we were going in hundredths, we've got 1 hundredth, 0.01. Then we'd have 2 hundredths, which is 0.02. And then 3 hundredths, 0.03. All the way through up to 0.06, 0.07, 0.08, 0.09. At that point, we've got 9 cubes. And if we add another one, because that's what we're doing, we're adding on 1 hundredth each time, or one little cube. At that point, we've got 10, and we know that we can exchange that for one of those, which in this case is worth a tenth, or 0.1. If we were to carry on, of course, we would go to, we'd have that tenth, and we'd have 100. So we'd have 0 ones, 1 tenth, and 100th, and so on. Okay, hopefully that helps you understand how we might count up in hundredths. Okay, let's have a look at this then. So we've already looked at how if we make 10 hundredths, that gives us the same as 1 tenth. Okay, here's a picture of it. I've just shown you with the cubes that 10 of these, which we're using to represent hundredths, because there are 100 in a whole, is the same as one of those. So 10 hundredths is equal to 1 tenth. Now, if you remember from our work in fractions, to find equivalent fractions, fractions that are worth the same, can you remember what we had to do? We had to do the same to the top and the bottom. So if I divide both the top and the bottom by 10, you can see why 10 hundredths is equivalent to 1 tenth. You can see it visually, and you can see it with equipment as well. So 10 hundredths is equal to 1 tenth, or if we're writing it as a decimal, 0.1. 10 hundredths is 1 tenth. If you imagine we were writing, we've got to 0.08, 0.09, the next one would be 0.10. Now we don't need that 0, it's not holding a place, so we could actually just say 0.1. Be really careful not to say 0.10. 10 is a number, isn't it, that means 1/10, and it's not, that's not what it means there. So we say 0.10. So 10 hundredths is 1 tenth. You can see here that 20 hundredths would be 2 tenths, 30 hundredths would be 3 tenths, and so on. Let's have a look then at the next bit. Number 6, what is 2 tenths and 5 hundredths written as a decimal? There are no whole ones mentioned, so we've got 0 in the ones column, 2 tenths and 5 hundredths, which is 0.25. There's a reminder there, we say 0.25. We don't say 0.25 because 25 means 2 tens and 5 ones. 0.25. Let's have a look at another one. If we want to change 15 hundredths to a decimal, well, 15 hundredths, if we get 15 of them, let's do it here as well with some cubes. If I get 15, here's my 15 hundredths. How many rods can I make? Well, let's just see. There we go. I've made 1 rod, so that's 1 tenth. So I can regroup that into tenths. And then I've got 5 hundredths left, so I've got 0.15. This is just a different way of looking at it. We can split the hundredths. 15 hundredths can be split into 10 hundredths and 5 hundredths. And so if you imagine it like this, we've got our 15, we split them into 10 and 1. We're going to change that one into a tenth. We've now got 1/10 and 5 hundredths, or 0.15. This is just lots of different ways of getting to the same answer point. Okay, so however you remember it, or if you find the pictures useful, you can always draw it. If you find it useful to have equipment, you could use the virtual base 10, or you could get some Lego or something to help you. Okay, moving on then, last one. So let's have a look. Number 8, what decimals are shown? Could you pause and have a go and then unpause for the answer? Okay, there are 11 shaded parts here. So 11 hundredths. Now I know that 10 hundredths is the same as 1/10. So I've got 0 whole ones, but 1/10, that's that row there, and 1/100th. And here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tenths, so 4 rows are coloured in. So it's 4 tenths, and I've got 8 hundredths, giving me 0.48. Okay, can you pause and have a go at 9 and 10 for me, and then unpause, and I'll go through them. Okay, let's have a look. Let's just make sure first that we know what each interval is. This is a tenth, and it's in 10 equal parts, so we can work out that each one must be a hundredth. So if I was counting up from the end, I would go 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, 0.04, 0.05, 0.06, 0.07. Of course, you hopefully spotted that this was halfway, so we could have started at 0.05. And this one, we've got 0.11, 0.12, 0.13, 0.14. And here, we've got no whole ones, we've got 5 tenths, and we've got 4 hundredths, 0.54. And then B, right, here we've got 17 hundredths. So I'm just going to box those 10 up, and I'm going to exchange them for 1/10. So I've now got 0 whole ones, 1/10, and 5, 6, 7 hundredths left. 21 hundredths, well, 20 of those would be 2 tenths, wouldn't they? So 0.21, and 87 hundredths, 0.87, because it's the same as 8 tenths and 7 hundredths. Just a reminder why. We can partition it into 80 hundredths and 7 hundredths. That is the same as 8 tenths. So we have 8 tenths and 7 hundredths, 0.87. Okay, 11, just something to talk through then. Does 0.9 have the same value as 0.90? Yes. 0.90 would be 90 hundredths. Using our knowledge of equivalent fractions, that's the same as 9 tenths. So we divided them both by 10. And 9 tenths can be written as 0.9. So 0.9 and 0.90 have the same value. Okay, over to you now then. So what we'd like you to do is have a go at practice 2, just 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so that's those 4 there. And then there are some varied fluency tasks for you to do afterwards, just to practice, really to nail that understanding of hundredths and tenths before we move on to looking at when we go over 1 tomorrow.